It's time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. It's episode 22. We've had our coffees. We're feeling good. I'm Rob Bence. I'm my co-host. I sense us a little closer. Rob Dix, are you there?
I am back in the UK. We're nearly in the same city for once. It's good to be here. More about that later on, but we've got a lot to get through because this week we are being Mythbusters, which isn't as cool as Ghostbusters, but we're getting there. We're going to be exploding some property myths. So keep on listening and you might end up re-examining some things that you'd always taken for granted. And then continuing that theme, we're going to be exposing some dirty tricks used by estate agents in our news story. And with the resource of the week, we're going to be showing how if you've got $5, you can get practically anything done for you. So stay tuned for that one.
Practically anything. You're going to be shocked when you see this one. But don't zoom ahead to the end. We've got plenty of good stuff before. And before we get going, we, as always, love to send some thanks and love to our listeners who've left reviews. And there's been a surge of reviews recently, so thank you so much. We're going to get through them all. But this week, we're going international again. It's been a while. First of all, we've got Nick in Beijing. And Nick says, great podcast, clear, concise and complete, full of practical tips for those of us who are considering property as a solution for early retirement. Thanks, Rob and Rob, and keep up the good work. And then David from Australia says, good advice that translates beyond the UK market. Great discussions and viewpoints. I'm Australian, whose market and rules are very different, but the discussions translate well. Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Nick. It's good to see the support is international, not just UK-based.
Always love any reviews from wherever they come from. It's nice to have a bit of an international flavour this week to balance out me being more UK-based. But, Rob, the big news this week, of course, is the release of a brand new podcast.
Property News Radio has gone live. Very exciting. Very nervous as well. I was slightly more nervous about releasing this one because I was on my own. I haven't got you to hold my virtual hand, Rob. It's gone really well. And thank you to all the people who've got behind that podcast already. There's been loads of reviews and it's done really well in the charts. So thank you very much to everyone who's got behind Property News Radio. I'm not going to go on about it here because this is the Property Podcast. But if you are interested and you would like to listen, if you go to propertynewsradio.com, you can find a show there. And it's just a short 15-minute show where you can find out what's going on in the property market every week via myself. So thank you to everyone who's got behind it.
And I've been listening and very much enjoyed it. I've learned something from it. And I was glad to be name-checked in episode 1. It was like I was almost there.
I did that to prove you were listening, Rob.
Yeah.
That's not the only bit of podcast news we've got, because we've got a secret special podcast, haven't we?
We have, which we can't say too much about in case the word gets out. But we have recorded a secret episode. And the only way to get hold of that episode is to join the mailing list. If you're already on the mailing list, you're going to have the link sent to you. But if you're not, then you need to get on there quick. Thepropertypodcast.com is the place to go. Sign up for our mailing list and you will have a secret bonus episode sent to you, which will never appear on iTunes. And I really can't say any more than that.
Oh, the mystery. Yeah. Well, that's all we can say. But what we can say a lot about is the fantastic response we've had from our listeners recently. We just wanted to mention it because we don't take it for granted. We've had a surge of reviews, as I've already said. We've had lots of positive feedback by email and lots of people calling in as well to the RMP office to speak to myself. I know Rob's had an avalanche of emails as well of people getting in touch saying really lovely things. So we just wanted to take time out to say thank you.
We absolutely love it. I've had some great emails recently, some really nice conversations with people. And we really don't take it for granted. We know that without it, we wouldn't enjoy a hundredth of the amount that we do. We love getting the feedback. With that in mind, we're actually going to be celebrating us both being in the same city for once by having a mini meetup of Property Podcast listeners. Nothing huge, not a big event. It's just going to be getting together for some coffees or some beers and getting a chance to meet us and meet other property investors and sort of talk shop, I suppose. We're going to be doing this on Thursday, the 29th of August. It's going to be at 6 o'clock and it is going to be in King's Cross in London. If you're a London-based listener, then you should definitely be there. And if you live anywhere nearby, then it should be pretty easy for you to get into King's Cross. We're not going to be far from the station. We're going to be putting all the details on a special page of the website. So if you're interested in coming along, you want to be going to thepropertypodcast.com/meetup. That's thepropertypodcast.com/meetup. We'll link to that in the show notes as well. And that'll give you all the details for how to register to come along and tell you where it is. It's going to be absolutely free. Come along, have a couple of drinks and meet some fellow property people.
Yeah, nice and laid back. No massive agendas. Just a nice, polite conversation, meeting like-minded individuals. I've spoken to a few people who've said they've never really been to a property networking meeting before because they think it might be intimidating for them. This is your opportunity to get started. This is going to be so laid back, it's going to be silly. It's just going to be really friendly, small group of people just talking about property and anything else you wish to discuss. So come along. We'd love to meet as many of you as possible. 29th of August on the Thursday, 6 p.m, King's Cross. Hopefully see you soon.
Well, let's get moving on to the news of the week then, Rob, which is some disturbing news about estate agents, which I know that you've actually experienced this for yourself already.
It's not like estate agents to have negative news around them, Rob. So this was a bit of a shocker. It's a story in the Times over the weekend, and we'll obviously link to it in the show notes so you can see that. Estate agents have been accused, some of them at least, of putting pressure on clients to use their in-house services. So what do we mean by in-house services? Well, have you ever been into a estate agent's office and inquired about a property and they've said, well, do you want to have a chat with our mortgage broker first so you can see what's possible?
Every time.
Or you've gone to put an offer in and they've suggested you use their conveyancing services. Well, that's always been the way, but what the Times is reporting now is because the property market is taking off a bit, especially, in London it has done for a while, the agents are using this as a tool to say, well, if you want the best chance to get this deal, this property, you should really use our services so we know you're serious. Now, the estate agents have come out and said, well, no, this isn't true, but their marketing material suggests otherwise. Not all estate agents are bad, far from it. I know there's some fantastic agents who listen to this podcast, and I've met a few of them already, so don't worry, guys, we're not talking about you. But there are certainly a few London-based agents who are guilty of this practice. Barnard Marcus gets singled out by the article. Now, I've not experienced it with them myself, but the article says that happens. But it's funny, I've been into estate agents over the last few years, and I remember the lady saying to me, oh, well, would you like to use our mortgage services? And I said, no, it's fine. I work in property. And she said, oh, but you'll get a better rate. So I thought, well, she might have not woken up yet. I'll say it again. Well, I work in property investment and I have mortgage brokers who work with me all the time. And we carried on a conversation, but she wasn't done. She had to try, third time lucky. Maybe she thought I was confused, but she said, it might be just worth having a chat with our brokers in case, your brokers can't get the same deals our brokers can. So I just politely said, well, maybe later, let's just see what happens. It's just like, wow. It's like even as someone who says they work in the industry, who works with brokers on a daily basis, and she still pushed the services. So God knows how pushy that agent must have been with people who don't work in the industry. So yeah, interesting article from the Times. Is it bad practice? I'll let you decide, but it's certainly not, I would say, exceptional customer service.
I almost feel bad for the lady in your story because they must be under so much pressure to upsell services like that. I can imagine at the corporates, they must be required to ask that kind of thing, and it's not very nice for anyone. And I think in the article, they were saying it was to do with motivation. Like they want to make sure that people can proceed. They don't want to be wasting their time with people who can't get mortgages or whatever. It sounds like the amount of pressure that's being put on is totally different, and you shouldn't be standing for that. You should have all your ducks in a row before you go looking. Like you can speak to a broker, maybe get a decision in principle, and have recommendations for surveyors and solicitors so you're ready to go when you're sort of ready to do viewings and put in offers. But you should absolutely never be under any pressure to be tied into other services to get preferential treatment. It's unacceptable.
But Rob, we did enough ranting last week.
We did, yeah.
And we stayed fairly neutral on that one. We have said there are some good agents. So before we get deep into a big rant again, let's move on to our topic of the week.
Let's do that. And we're going to be hopefully making you think about some things in a new way this week. We're going to be doing some property myth busting. The 5 biggest property investment myths busted is what we're calling this segment. That's because in property, there's a lot of received wisdom. When you look at it in a bit more detail, it just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. These aren't malicious myths, but they normally arise from well-meaning people trying to sort of pressure you to do the same thing that's worked for them without realising that there are other ways of doing things, or maybe what used to be true just isn't relevant anymore. We've picked out what we think are the biggest property myths, and we're going to go through and bust them one by one. So Rob, let's get started with this.
So the first myth is you should only invest in London. Okay, so if you're going to invest in property, the only place you should be focusing on is London. It's definitely not true. I can understand why that myth has come about, because London has done well recently, but let's look into it. First of all, London is a fantastic place to invest. The fundamentals are super strong. For everything we look out for, the transport links, the investment, the jobs, the demographics, it's all there. So London is a great place to invest. But London is not the only good place to invest. Now, I know a lot of people in London are guilty of only ever looking in London and never leaving. I'm a northerner, so I can say that living in London, I can be cheeky. But London is not the only place that has the good fundamentals that we look for in investment. There are plenty of areas outside of London that you should invest in or consider as part of your portfolio. On the Property News Radio, the first podcast I did was looking at property price predictions, and I covered this topic in more detail. But the point is that London has offered value for a while now, but it can't continue to surge forever. There are areas outside of London which offer exceptional value. Now, have a look at this for yourself and do your research. But if the yields are particularly strong outside of London and not so strong inside of London, that suggests there's value elsewhere. It's not that you should only invest in London or you should only invest outside of London. The point being is you should mix. My portfolio is mixed, and I always recommend that everyone else should mix. I know Rob's portfolio is mixed. A mix of different areas is no bad thing. So have a look at areas outside of London. Do your research if you're not familiar with these places. But if you do your research, you can start to paint a picture of areas that can offer exceptional value and very good returns and good long-term prospects as well.
I don't have too much to add to that. I think if people do want to know more, Property News Radio is probably the place to go because you do talk about it in a lot more detail there. London depends on your goals as always, doesn't it? Because in London, if you want sort of safety and you want to have assured demand, then maybe London is a place you might want to have one or two properties. But then the yields are lower and London isn't immune to price shocks. So it's definitely not the only place in the UK. There is life outside the M25.
There certainly is.
Apparently. Our second point is, the second myth, never invest in flats is the myth. And I just don't think that's true. I've always been a fan of flats. And I'm actually a big fan of ex-local authority flats, which a lot of people aren't. But I like them because they tend to be really well proportioned and the service charges are fairly knowable and reliable. And I've actually just bought a house and wow, do they come with some extra expenses that I've forgotten about. I find that maintenance is lower on flats. In my opinion, there's a lot in favour of flats. Of course, there are service charges. But then you can just build those service charges into your figures. And those service charges do actually incorporate certain costs like buildings insurance that you'd have to pay anyway. The other thing that people talk about is the possibility of works bills. And that is an issue that you have to pay a share of any of the work that gets done on the block. If it's a large block and you don't have any control over the process and it's all done by a private company, that can be a bit uncomfortable. Smaller blocks, you can band together with other leaseholders and make sure that they're getting competitive quotes and they're not doing unnecessary work and all the rest of it. I don't think that's a major con compared to some of the advantages of investing in flats. And Rob, the other factor, of course, is the lease and the length of the lease. And I know that you've got a rule of thumb about that.
Whenever we look at flats or apartments as an investment with the people who work with us at RMP, one of the things we look at is the length of lease. And we always look for apartments that have 125 years or more left on the lease. And there's a reason for that. We haven't just picked that number out randomly. The reason is that if you go through the length of a term of a mortgage, which is often 25 years, the average mortgage length, then at the end of that term, you're going to have 100 years left on your lease. That's still a good amount as far as I'm concerned, because there's plenty of new builds that are out there that come with 99-year leases. If you're after a full mortgage term of 25 years, still got 100 years, then what I'm saying is you've got plenty of space left on that lease before anything detrimental starts happening to the prices or the mortgageability of that property. Always look for 125 plus and you'll be fine. There's actually quite a few out there now of developers who give 999 years on a lease, which is effectively a freehold, and if you think about it. 125 or above is the general rule of thumb if you're looking by yourself. If you stick to that, then you clearly reduce your risk. So moving on, our next one, number 3, is you have to be a landlord. So myth number 3 is you have to be a landlord. Well, technically you do, because on paper, legally, you are a landlord if you do buy to let and let your property out. But the term landlord suggests that you're very much hands-on. But being a landlord is a choice in terms of the amount of work you put in. So when I say landlord, I mean that you're hands-on, full-time involved in property. I believe you have a choice. You can be an investor or a landlord. So you can either be hands-on if you so wish, or you can set systems up and pay professionals that you can act as an investor and dedicate very little time to your property portfolio. If you want to deep dive into this subject a little more, we've done an episode called Investor versus Landlord. And it was one of our early episodes. It was really good, actually, really enjoyable episode. Go back and listen to that one. We'll link to it in the show notes. But basically, the point we come to is there's merits and benefits of taking both approaches. But the most important thing to realize is you're not forced to being full-time when you invest in property. There are things you can do to minimize your time invested that basically involves setting up systems and working with professionals. So if you do the things up front, put the effort in up front, your portfolio can tick away nicely in the background and requires very little of your time. So it is a choice. Some people like to preach that, it's rolling up the sleeves and, getting stuck in, day out, and it's such a hard graft being a landlord. Well, yes, it can be if you want it, but, it's like doing a garden. You can make it an absolute slog or you can hire a gardener. It's up to you.
A lot of people like getting involved and going and doing everything themselves and doing the maintenance, and that's fine. If you can't get enough of your own DIY, then go and do someone else's and come around and do mine as well while you're at it. It doesn't have to be that way if you don't want it to. It's about the whole mentality of seeing yourself as a business owner and having the systems in place and having staff to make sure that everything gets done without your direct involvement. Because it's always a bit risky to have a business that relies 100% on your own involvement. It's like, if anything happens to you or you want to go on holiday or anything, then you don't want things to completely fall apart. The only thing that I would say is that you do have to remember that if you use an agent or however you manage your properties, the legal responsibility ultimately always stops with you. So if an agent screws up and doesn't issue a safety certificate or something like that, it is your neck on the line legally. That's why I'd always recommend educating yourself, as you are right now by listening to this podcast, to make sure that you know how things are meant to be working and just make sure you're not being naive and if your agent or whoever you've put in charge is doing a poor job, and you can make sure that everything's done properly. Other than that, you really don't have to be doing it all yourself. There's just a kind of a baseline level of knowledge that you should need to be a responsible property owner. All right, let's move on to myth number 4. Big myth here. Your home is an asset. We've talked about this before, and it's the real crux of the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That's been a previous resource of the week. We both absolutely love that book, and it's the book that's got a lot of people into property. It's opened their eyes to the whole idea of property investment. And the author of that book, Robert Kiyosaki, says that everyone thinks your home is an asset, but it's really not. His definition of an asset is if it puts money in your pocket each month, then it's an asset. And if it takes money out, it's a liability. And with your home, of course, it's not putting money in your pocket. No one's paying you for it. You're having to pay out on the mortgage and the bills and repairs and everything else. And it's taking money out of your pocket. Therefore, by his definition, it's a liability. Okay, it might be going up in value on paper, but if you're living there, then you can't exactly just liquidate it and bank the cash. You need somewhere to live. It's a paper asset, but in reality, it's a liability that's costing you money every month. Personally, I rent my home, and I know lots of other investors do as well, because we know that the assets are properties where other people are paying you rent, and that rent exceeds the cost of your mortgage and all your other expenses, so it's putting money in your pocket. So I don't need to own my own home because I'm getting my income and my capital appreciation from elsewhere. So that is a myth that I think is a really important one to get your head around that and change your mindset around that whole thing. And so you realise what an asset really is.
You've nailed it, Rob. I mean, for me, if you want to cause an argument around the dinner table and you've got a load of property owners who own their own home, tell them that their home isn't an asset and watch the conversation light up, because I find all the time that people challenge me on this point. And if you go through, the logic with them, they'll soon come round to it. But initially, they're very protective of their homes because they do see it as their maybe future retirement fund, that they'll downsize and that's how they'll retire. Very risky strategy. I really feel you should, invest separately and not just rely on your own home to go up in value. If you want to spark up the entertainment levels of your next dinner party, start telling people their homes are not assets and see what happens. The 5th myth is you should always buy near where you live. Now, a lot of property investors, their first investment is often very near to where they live. And that's understandable because it's secure, they know it, it's easy to do, it feels comfortable, it's within their comfort zones. But maybe they're the reasons why you should look further afield. Because if it is within your comfort zone, then are you doing the best for your money? is your money working hard enough? Have you just done the easy option or have you done the best option? They're not necessarily the same thing. Okay, so I'll use an analogy here. If you have a local bank to you and that bank is returning 2% and all your wealth is in that bank at 2%, you might be happy. It's down the road. You can go and visit the bank manager whenever you want. But let's say you live in London and you find there's a bank in Glasgow that offers 10% returns. The caveat is you have to go to that bank to deposit any funds and it has to be there. You have to go to that bank. If you want any dealings with it, you have to go to the branch itself, but the return is 5 times as much. Me personally, I would bank in Glasgow, even though I live just outside London, because the return is so much better. View that the same as property. Have a look at different areas. Don't just rule the other areas out because you don't know them initially. If you're prepared to put the research in, and research is key here, but if you're prepared to put the research in, get familiar with other areas, then you may achieve a far better return. So you might be lucky in your local area, may be fantastic for property investment. I've picked Warrington out as an area before I like. If you live in Warrington, then maybe you don't have to look further afield. But if you live in a country village, then that might not be the best place to invest because the yields might not be a fantastic return and the fundamentals might not be there. Maybe a brilliant place to live, but not necessarily a brilliant place to invest. So I think the point I'm making here is don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself because your comfort zone tells you to invest nearby. Have a look at other areas and see, am I making the most of my money? Is my money working as hard as possible?
I think a lot of it comes down to comfort zone. Then there's also the argument that you need to be nearby to fix things or whatever if you need to pop round. But we've already seen with the previous myth that you don't have to do things that way. You can easily just visit your property once a year if you want to do things that way. That argument doesn't really wash if that's how you want to set up your business. The local knowledge argument is a strong one. It's like, okay, if you know your area really well, then how are you going to make sure that in another area you don't buy in a bad part of town or something like that? It's not hard to do a lot of research online now, and what's to stop you moving into a hotel in the area for a week and intensively researching the area and making a load of contacts who can be your eyes and ears in the area? I really don't think it's necessary to limit yourself in that way if you don't particularly want to, and that all ties back into the attitude of being a business owner or an investor rather than a landlord. So it's very much two sides of the same coin.
So I hope you've enjoyed those 5 myths. Probably a little bit different to what you would expect. A lot of people won't agree with those, but that's why they're myths, because people have just been told it and then you just automatically accept it. So it's good that we've tackled this subject because you don't get sucked into those common beliefs, which actually a lot of them are limiting. So make sure you understand them. If you have any questions, jump onto the website, go to thepropertypodcast.com, go to episode 22 and leave a comment. Do you agree? Do you disagree? We'd love to hear. So, resource of the week, Rob. We both use this one. We both love it. And it's not because we're cheapskates.
It is a cheapskate's paradise, but it's also really, really useful for business. And it's good for entertainment if you want people to do weird things for you as well. It is Fiverr.com. So that's Fiverr with 2 R's, FIVERR.com. What have you bought from there?
What haven't I? God. Stuff I need, stuff I don't need. The great thing is, it's Fiverr.com, but it's not £5. It's $5. So it's like £3.60 something on today's exchange rate to get a lot of stuff done for you. It can be, anything from intros to videos to voiceovers to artwork. The list goes on. SEO stuff, you've got to be very careful with that if you're a business, I have to point out. But there's basic articles, not for the main website, but it may be used for sub-sites and so on. There is so much you can use there for a business, but I'm sure property investors can get good use out of it as well. There's definitely going to be tools there and gigs, as they call them, which is what you buy as a gig for $5. There's definitely gigs there that you can buy, which property investors can use as well. For example, you may use a virtual assistant for an hour for $5. Believe it or not, you really can. And you might ask them to research an area for you, which is crazy. But you can for such little money. It's because it's an international market. It allows people to offer gigs which seem exceptional value to people who live in expensive places.
And it's all reviewed and everything, so you can see the ratings that other people have left. So you can be reasonably confident that you're going to get a good service provided. But then if you don't, it doesn't match your expectations, it's only $5, so why not? It's good for even little things like website tweaks. If there's something on your website you can't get working, you can probably get someone for $5 to sort it out for you and save a huge amount of your own time. And you can even do really silly stuff on there, like there are people who will sing birthday messages to your friend and all that kind of thing. There's absolutely loads, but it's really good fun. It can get quite addictive. As an investor, there's always all kinds of research and mundane tasks that you can get people to handle very cheaply for you, so well worth a look for business and entertainment purposes.
There's a lot of entertainment stuff there. Rob, if you ordered the gig where you can get somebody to write your name across their face?
No, I haven't seen that one. That's going to happen.
No, neither have I. No.
Do you think the property podcast would fit, or do we need to abbreviate it?
If you find someone with a really big face, then we might be able to.
That could work.
But we might not be exploiting that gig anytime soon. Right, Rob, that's another week done. I hope everyone's found it useful, but we've got a few things to keep people informed about. Of course, we've got next week's episode, which is very special.
Lisa Orme, who's a good friend of the podcast and a terrific mortgage broker, she is going to be helping us through an episode which we're calling Buy-to-Let Mortgages for Beginners. You know, we mention mortgages probably in every episode because it's such a big part of investing, but we're not the experts. We can't give advice in the same way that she can. Lisa is going to be providing us with some really, really great information about buy-to-let mortgages if you don't know all the ins and outs of it, which we're going to be talking through on next week's episode. I'm really excited about that one.
Yeah, and don't forget as well that to get on the mailing list as soon as possible to sign up for the secret podcast, because that'll be going out soon. And of course, the meetup, which is thepropertypodcast.com/meetup. Go there and find out about the event that's happening on the 29th. We'd love to see as many of you as possible. Lovely. Well, that's us, Rob. That's another week. I look forward to catching up when we go through all the information that Lisa has got for us.
Thank you very much to everyone for listening. We'll see you next week.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.
And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.